and we're going to start with not one that we would have probably thought on week 11 of the NFL season coming into this. I mean, you get your Bills, Chiefs, and your Chargers. I don't know, Rams. There's these two, the ones that we were looking, Bucks, that we were looking to be the premier games. But the one that is given us a lot of ammunition for DFS and in single season long alike is the Chicago Bears against the Atlanta Falcons. We've got an over-under of 50. And, of course, the highlight here is Justin Fields, who all of a sudden has not only gone from fantasy bust to fantasy playable, but he has entered the elite of fantasy quarterbacks. He's currently the QB4 on the season after going absolutely bonkers the last few weeks. So the last 4 weeks he finished QB5 in New England, finished QB5 in Dallas, and then the last 2 weeks against Miami and Detroit, he was the overall QB1 by quite a lot, of course. They are designing runs for him. The offense has completely changed to work around Fields. They've turned him into Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts or whoever you want to compare him to. For season long, it's an easy choice. He is an upper tier QB1. You're starting him over most quarterbacks. I had a nice little discussion about that on Twitter with people. Of course, I've neglected to mention I was talking about fantasy. Sparked a lot of arguments with real life quarterbacks with them saying, and I couldn't understand why people were saying I'd start like 25 quarterbacks over him. What are you talking about? But yeah, for fantasy, it's a different story. So for DFS, though, Eric, a couple weeks ago, we had a bargain with Fields at 5,300. I'm going to check the pricing, the pricing trajectory that he's gone through so far. But, long story short, we've got him now, I guess you could call him fully priced at 7,600. So the first question I'm going to pose to you here is, how are you treating him in DFS? Do you think he's still cash playable at that price? In GPP, I think it's pretty clear he is, but how are you using him if you are using him?
I think it's yes to both. I think he's certainly still in the cash radar, right? We've talked about it ad nauseum at this point, right? The quarterback that is going to catch you with their legs is the cheat code in this game, and those quarterbacks that do it week in and week out are usually in like the low to mid 8K range. So while Justin Fields' price is skyrocketing, 7.6K is still a pretty solid value on him. In the tournament, next, really interesting. There's a player on his team that is draw a lot of ownership, that being David Montgomery, in light of the Khalil Herbert news. So finding ways to pair Justin Fields with some of the lesser owned or less popular options for the Bears is really going to be a pretty big key to the slate, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And the Herbert news really kind of threw me a little bit because we're showing pretty significant rostership percentages from both of these players right now. Where are you at on playing them together, Fields and Montgomery?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. On its face, I don't really love it, other than it's going to be an unlikely pairing, right? So you will create a bit of leverage on the field by having those two together. The usage from Montgomery is a little bit of ahead. His volume certainly should increase, but in catching the same quantity of passes that he has in years past, right? So, whether or not he can, he just kind of gobbles up all of those targets and can get kind of the double production from his work as a pass catcher is somewhat of an open question. I think he'll probably see an uptick there, but pairing those two together isn't going to be a very popular choice, but it's not without its risks either.
Yeah, I agree as well. And right now, in my early picks, I've chosen Montgomery because there are a lot of cheat quarterbacks, which we'll get into as we break down this entire slate. I do think you need one of them in a cash lineup, just simply because you're talking about this game is interesting because it's got such a high over under, which usually, I mean, 50 is not breaking the slate high, but I mean for these two teams it's high, and it's I think the highest one on the slate. There might be, I haven't checked the Bills Browns today since they've moved it to Detroit. So I'll kind of give that a look before we get to it. But it's at least one of the top two games on the slate and over under, which is odd to me because that's usually a pass heavy game that promotes such a high over under. And the Bears and the Falcons are first and second in the league in rushing yards. So it's interesting to me that, we're setting up for a track meet when we don't have passing teams. So, I mean, if you're looking at the matchup, some of the Bears a little bit more. If you're looking at the matchups and you do play Fields in that GPP, what pass catchers are you likely to pair him with? I mean, you've got Mooney, who is leading Chicago in pretty much every relevant receiving stat, targets, catches, yards, air yards, everything like that. But you've also got Cole Kmet, who's got 5 touchdowns over the last 3 games, and they're finally designing, plays for him, especially in the red zone. So how would you go about pairing Fields in GPPs?
Yeah, I think the line for that I want to take with Fields is really trying to overload stack him. In this hot streak that he's been going on, really he hasn't been supporting more than one pass catcher, right? So, like you mentioned, it's by and large been Cole Kmet. So I think to get to Kmet and Mooney, to get to Kmet and Chase Claypool is going to be a really unique combination. The thing that's kind of surprising to me, I'm not sure what you're seeing on your side. I'm seeing Cole Kmet in the low single digits in terms of rostership. Maybe that has to do with the questionable tag next to his name. But at 4.1K, I would expect him to be, far more popular, pushing that kind of 8 to 10% range. If down in this range, I'll certainly be well overweight to the field, but I'm trying to get my edge by trotting out Field net and another pass catcher for the Bears.
Yeah, and that's a good showdown thing that I always do too. Generally the field comes in with those single stacks, and you get leverage with the double stacks. Like, even if it seems like you're not, like, it doesn't, even if you have, I'm trying to think of an example here, like a, Brady, Godwin, Mike Evans stack. It seems like when people stack Brady, they're going to do it with those double receivers. But, if you look at data, the field really doesn't do that. They pick one based on the matchup, and they go by that. So I like that idea a lot. And too, that as I'm looking right now, it still is not showing Kmet to be very popular at all, which is very surprising to me. I'm seeing similarly priced tight ends showing a lot more rostership than him. Dalton Schultz, Tyler Higbee, Pat Freiermuth are all showing more ownership than him. Even the cheaper ones like Hayden Hurst and Greg Dulcich are as well. Dawson Knox at 3.2 is showing more. Even Kyle Pitts at 4,400 right now. So if that's the case, I mean, I love that in GPP. I went into the week thinking he was going to be my cash tight end, but, that's going to be, that's not at that rostership. I mean, I think that's more of a GPP play. So how about the Atlanta side? We've got, again, this is a very similar archetype team. You've got a running quarterback. You've got a pretty condensed offense. It's a run first team, and they've had success using the ground game rather than through the air, especially since with Cordarrelle Patterson on the field. So we'll start with Marcus Mariota here. That I think at 5,500, he enters the conversation absolutely for cash. The rostership is not totally reflecting that right now, but I mean, at 5,500, if you want to go cheap there, I like him against this Bears defense, who over the last 3 games have given up 9.5 yards per attempt, and that's to Tua, Dak, and Jared Goff. Okay, so, I mean, if there is some passing in this game, Mariota does have a good matchup. He's another one, although not Fields' upside. on the ground, but does have that rushing floor that you want from those quarterbacks. So I do think Mariota is a good option in cash and GPP. What about the rest of the Falcons for you? Is there anybody that's sticking out to you to use in this game, either in the cash setting or as part of maybe even a stack or a bring back to a Bears stack?
Yeah, so I agree that Mariota's on the cash radar. I see him pushing 10% rostership, which is relatively popular for a quarterback, right? We don't see these 20% guys unless someone's just flatly mispriced. For the rest of the Falcons, I think there's some really interesting leverage here. Drake London continues to win on the vast majority of routes that he's running, right? The real question is the volume of passing in this offense. It's kind of ebbed and flowed throughout the when you were talking matchup for Mariota, I think the point to underscore is that Chicago throughout the season, from a fantasy points per game standpoint, has been kind of an average to a somewhat bad matchup according to the fantasy points they've surrendered. But actually, over the course of this recent stretch, Chicago has picked up their pace of play, and in turn, the pace of the games that they're in has increased dramatically. And you're starting to see those fantasy points allowed stats walk up in kind, right? So I do think this is a matchup that can take advantage of. Drake London is going to see a fair amount of Jalen Jones on Sunday. He's allowing a catch rate at 87%, right? So I do expect Drake London to be able to haul in a lot of passes. Is a little bit of a pace-up spot for the Falcons all of a sudden. The second name that comes to mind, I mean, I'm kind of pot committed with this guy, Kyle Pitts, right? He is still a large part of this offense on percentage, right? He plays a very big role in the Falcons offense. If I'm betting on the high tide raising the ship for Drake London, I'm doing the same thing for Kyle Pitts. And again, this is someone that's sitting around 2% rostership in terms of the projection I'm looking at. So one to keep an eye. This is going to be a popular game overall, but there are several guys with game-breaking skill sets that are going to be in the low single digits, and those are going to be my priorities in attacking this game.
Yeah, I like it. And it's a fun one to attack, too. It's like, it's one of those bad team potential shootout games, but it's just so unusual to me, not through the air with this one. So it's an interesting one. I think there's multiple ways. I think you hit on all the right notes with the Falcons team there, too. So yeah, that's kind of the Bears, the Bears Falcons for us, and I like starting with that one too because it's complex, it's many layered. We're gonna get into a little bit more of a straightforward one right now, but we got some questions. I want to welcome in Sarah. Yep. I like it. So all right, that is Eagles Colts. Moving right along here, we're going to get to the rest of these games in the next 15 minutes.